When were you born?
1930.
And what did your parents do in Marion?
Mother was at home, and we had a big old Frank furnace house, and my father was a stockbroker, and then in World War II he went away in the Navy because he loved boats, and he was away 4 years and was a commander of each ship,
And he was in the Pacific arena?
Pacific and the Atlantic.
And how old were you when this happened? You were a teenager?
Yes. There were 3 girls, 4 years apart. So my mother had quite a time of it.
You were there when he returned from the war?
Yes.
Okay, and then when did you leave Marion?
My mother was old-fashioned, and she thought her whole job was to get all the girls married off. So we all married at 18, 19 years old.
And your husband? His name?
Byron Krick. We got it in our heads we wanted a dairy farm. We had never been on a farm. And he proceeded to work as a tenant farmer and take courses at Penn State for dairy farming. We were looking for cheap land, and up near Reading and all the areas, the Amish. We didn't know the Amish really loved their land. We soon learned. And let's see, Byron's father, who was a doctor, said he wanted to buy us a farm. So we hunted for a dairy farm, and then we found one. He had changed his mind. So, let me see. We just dropped that whole idea. And we bought a little tiny house in Moorstein on Route 29. $3,500. 1.5 acres. And it had 3 rooms. And we had 2 little children, and we worked on that house every weekend until we had it all fixed up nicely. In 3 years we sold it for $16,800, and that was the down payment on our farm, Wild Oats Farm, Scalp Level Road.
And how long did you live there, and were you able to raise your cattle?
Raise the cattle? We didn't have to, we had given up the dairy farm idea, luckily. And
Good idea.
we had Angus, we had about 30 sheep, we had horses, and as a project my son raised chickens. And the county agent said, unless you really like chickens, you're not going to make any money. And my son was a businessman even when he was 12, so he kept books. And it turns out chickens don't lay their eggs until about 5 months, so we had to wait all that time. And we also lived in a very hilly place where he had to sell the eggs and deliver them on his bike up and down hills. And at the end of the year, he had earned minus $1.
What kind of sheep did you raise?
We had Hampshire
Okay.
and 32 geese who ruled the farm.
They do.
They were old when I got them.
How long were you at the farm?
22 years. Children were off, to college. Byron had gotten better positions in his company and was traveling. So there I was on the farm.
With a lot of sheep and geese and
Yeah.
chickens.
And I had painted every building on the farm myself, and we did everything ourselves. And all the things that he used to fix broke down, like mowers and all that, fences, and so it was time to go. 1732, that farm was.
Yeah.
Dark house.
Like yours and mine. And from there, where did you move?
We were going to build one of the first contemporaries in this area. John Yerkes, the Davis house, had built the first one. And we went all over trying to look at modern houses. They were hard to find. And we designed one and built it on Ravine Road.
And when was this?
That's the kind of thing I can't remember. 1968. And we built a nice lake, and all the boys that worked for my husband, they were in construction by then. And all the local boys worked for him, Bobby Halls and George Frank and Chris Miles and Peter Miles and all the young boys. And he taught them all how to build houses. They were all in the business afterwards. Later, when he was very, very sick, much later, they came from far away and helped me fix that house up. And took half the deck off and fixed the chimneys, did everything. It was wonderful. So, we had huge parties with all their friends and all the Andes friends. The Andes used to give huge parties. And we would have them 4th of July. Start at 9 in the morning, and we would go down the road where the camp is and play baseball. And then come up, we had canoes and food and badminton and croquet and everything. And went to midnight. And then we would do fireworks. So I got to hate those parties. It took us about 3 weeks to get the place ready for them.
About 3 weeks to clean up too.
Oh, gosh.
Oh my. Now, how long were you living on Ravine Road?
Oh wait, I wrote it down. When he died in '88, we fixed it up and sold it around 1990. I lived over Highland Orchard store while we were finding this land and building this house. And George Frank built this house with me. I've always worked on houses. And I mixed cement and moved block and stained and shingled and everything.
So you've been here since 1990. Over the years, so you've lived in the township for roughly 45 or 50 years?
Yeah.
How have you seen the township evolve over the years?
The dirt roads went finally. This was a dirt road for years. And Stan Haller across the street remembers unwinding chicken wire and flattening it on this road. He knew there wouldn't be any traffic. That's how many cars went by then. And at the farm, we not only had the dirt road, there was a hill up from 322, but further up, there were banks like that, which held the snow like a container all the way up. And we were snowed in many, many times. And being an old farm, it had very old wiring, electric company kept telling us. And I'd say it went out of power about 5 times a year. And the people before me had commercial turkeys. They grew turkeys, and they had in the cellar, the length of the cellar, a freezer. And I, of course, grew my vegetables and made the fruit and everything, put everything in the freezer, which would proceed to thaw over and over. And Barn was a hunter, goose hunter, deer hunter, And, oh, I know what I forgot to tell you. Pheasants were all over the farm at that time. You could hear them calling all day and night. And they were just running by like chickens. And the year that they disappeared, the locals told me, was the year that a certain corn getting machine, whatever you call it,
Combine.
came in that was so efficient, it cleaned up all the corn in the fields, and they had nothing to eat. And Kate rode with the hunt. And the reason she was allowed to is they came through the farm, and I think it was something called West Whiteland Hunt, if there was such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they came through our farm, so she was allowed to go with them.
Because you're a landholder.
Yeah.
I was too. With
And we also
another
could go to the ball, which was very, very funny to me. Everybody all formally dressed up, and I was used to them in their old dirty clothes. Oh well. Fox hunting and equine activities were a big part of life in Chester County at that time. I was an art teacher at Upland Country Day School for 38 years. I didn't write down the year I started. It was a school that was started by the local people who had horses, and they wanted the children to be able to ride in the hunt a couple times a week and go to school. So and they taught half the classes. And the DuPonts, the Hannums, the Strouds, everybody gave the land and the buildings, and that's how it started. But then they discovered they couldn't get into any other schools afterwards, so they brought in John Cleveland, and he actually scheduled classes and got it up to par, and we were evaluated and off and running as a very good school. I retired when I was 72, about 8 years ago or something. I've lost track of the years.
That's okay.
I loved every minute of it.
And what medium was your favorite?
Oh, through the years, many things. I idolized Philip Jamison and did watercolor. And then I idolized Tom Bostel and went to many of his classes until he asked me to stop. And
Why did he ask you to stop?
well, I think it was
He asked me to stop.
Oh,
because-
he asked me to stop because it was so embarrassing to him. He was teaching night school with a bunch of old ladies that came with pictures of their pussycats and postcards to paint from, and he had to deal with them. And I remember him standing up in the class, and there was some lady that kept saying, "Oh yeah, I want to ask a question." And he said, "What is it?" Because he was a great talker, loved to talk. He gave you art history, he gave you how an artist thinks. And they're going on with these questions. And she said, "Why are you so dirty?" And he didn't blink an eye. He said, "Because I am the Prince of Darkness." That's why he didn't want me to go to those classes anymore. My daughter was an artist from the very beginning. My son was a musician, and I said a businessman. And by the age of 14, he was running a rock band. He was in it, and they were all older. And he managed them, and he didn't even drive.
What rock band?
A rock.
What was the name?
Oh, are you kidding? They had a new name every year. So,
Where did they play? Did they play in
the rock
Westchester?
band, you know, they were played everywhere. And then he was in that band for 14 years. They traveled all over America and Puerto Rico and everywhere. At one time they had Silver Stream trailers. And he, all through Muhlenberg, he played in that band in the summers and every weekend. and he put himself through graduate school even. So
Where did you go grocery shopping in Westchester, or where did you go?
when I was on the farm, I didn't have a car for 8 years. And on Saturdays, and maybe my husband didn't get home, maybe he was traveling, I had to wait. And there used to be an NP at the end of town, that was my store. I still hate big stores after that. We grew a lot of our food, and we butchered sheep, lambs, and the year we got a great big beef in was the worst year of the freezer thawing. Picture that. And I was so cheap when I put up grape juice and apple juice and everything, I would put it in plastic bags. But then they all got punctured and I had this mess of juice and vegetables and meat and venison and pheasant and wild geese. Oh, I hate freezers to this day. So that was my experience. Bad housewife experience. Both children went to the one-room schoolhouse, Copeland School. And my son got all the way to 6th grade in it with Mrs. Reed, and Katie got to the 4th, and that's when they consolidated Sconnelltown School and Copeland. And Mrs. Reed was spectacular. She taught everything through nature. The math, the reading,
Isn't that
everything, history. She was big on nature, which is something my children understood. And it was like a conduit.
Did you rely on anything from Westchester? Did you have Each's Dairies deliver your milk, perhaps?
Yes. We had, no, there was a Mr. White.
Yes, Tom White,
Yes, down on
right at the corner of Copeland Road.
Frank Road or where it was. Mr. White came, I had a laundryman, we had a bread man. We lived in a very long driveway. No one came. But Chris Sanderson would come with his violin, seems to me it was on his back, and just talk and play the violin. And we would give him a meal and off he would go. The other person that came was Mrs. Draper, who lived right near the school in an old house with no utilities. And George Frank that built this house and his cousin, they were old-fashioned boys, and they chopped her wood, drew the water, shoveled her snow, because their farm was right there near her old house for years and years and years. But she would come and tell a story. And these stories were crazy. They were a mix-up of Etruscans, Visigoths, whatever they are, Renaissance, times, everything all mixed up in one ball in the story, which she would, make up the story. And they were good stories. They actually had my children listening. And then we would have her to dinner and off she would walk. All this was walking. So that was kind of odd. We were enormous friends with the Camp people, the Colley family. He was director of that for 50 years, and then his children were my children's age. And my doctor is Bruce Colley. I was his first patient, primary doctor, and I still see all the Colleys. Arthur was 101 when he died 2 years ago. And let me see, Thelma, all the Andys. Thelma was my mentor. She taught me how to deal with sheep and garden, and I worked in her garden with her. That's how I learned. And a lot of my plants were from her place. And then she taught me how to teach art because I did not have a training. And I had Fridays off and went over to where she was teaching and just would observe and help her in her class. She was an excellent teacher. And we painted together and we hunted fossils together. And, oh gosh, Liz Heed.
Uh-huh.
What a character she was. When the East Bradford built its new school, she kind of fundraised for it in an amazing way. She just was full of fun and knew how to get excitement going. We would have fairs and parties and all sorts of things. The Hunt family had a bunch of kids, and he would plant Christmas trees everywhere for people. And we planted our whole 20 acres with trees with him by hand, and we planted them all on the camp and all over the place. And the camp owned the bird doll place on Scalp Level Road, and we would tramp around that. And I remember Tom Bostel used to use the word birdollian to describe that once a place starts going, it just disintegrates fast, and that's what he called birdollian. When we first ran through that place, furniture was in the house. And the bird doll story is a long story in itself. It's fascinating. Anyway, it had furniture. Within a year, the windows were broken, the plants were pulled out. There was like boxwood formal gardens gone. And of course, I was one of the plant takers. And then stone walls were taken. And the furniture was gone immediately. And it only took about 5 years. And it was like rubble. My pond at Ravine Lake House froze beautifully every year. In fact, Kerr Park froze. What you call it? Oh, the Jurakian Estate Lake. It froze.
Yeah.
We all
Great
skated
stuff.
there.
Yeah.
And we all went sledding everywhere. At the farm, we had a wonderful hill, and everybody came. But my lake froze, and we had kids come and play hockey. And they would play hockey from morning till night. I thought, how can those kids keep playing hockey? Well, it turns out they came and went. But the game never stopped. They used to sit on the dock and evidently go like that with their ice skates and splinter it and chop it to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And then they left trash around. And then a lawyer friend of mine said, do you realize you're liable for anything that happens to any child on that lake? And so we had to stop them. But I enjoyed it for a couple of years.